as we go because we have someone tuning in, so that's how they can hear us. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. There are several other people who've signed up. They may show up, they may not, but we don't want to make you wait here forever for them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming to demystifying those end of year course evaluations. I know that can be a really stressful time when you get to the end of the semester and you're like, what? I had no idea. So we have some folks here who are going to share their words of wisdom. But before we do that, before I introduce them, I have a funny video for you all that's only about 3 minutes long to let you know that you're not the only ones who might get a bad course evaluation. So here we go. And there are a couple curse words in here, so I apologize if you get offended.
What suggestions do you have for the work leadership program? Have someone more relevant, Jeff Klein, lead it.
Professor Lowe should go first to some undergrad or lower profile MBA programs and train herself how to teach before coming to school as reputable and with so high student expectations as Wharton is.
This is possibly the worst class I've ever taken in my life. Fair enough.
This course tries to accomplish too much at once and ultimately accomplishes nothing.
I mean, how embarrassing is it that we're being taught managing people at work by someone who's never managed anyone at work? That is ridiculous.
Pitkin can be so condescending. Yeah.
All I learned from Professor Sinkinson was how to bundle boring with difficult and to charge the price of an LT. It would even make a good bundle.
You remind me of a puppet.
Professor Bluen dresses like a 50-year-old librarian. Really?
Why do you dress up so much for class? I understand wearing a suit, but the pocket square? It makes me question maturity and cause me not to respect you as much.
Not sure how to say this without sounding offensive.
Culture, but secretly thinks Ariana Grande is blocked in Microsoft Word.
Very fast-paced. He could speak faster.
Professor Sinkinson seriously overestimated the demand function for lame jokes.
She would advertise that she had tea after office hours. This honestly just deterred me from going to office hours with her because I didn't want to sit and have tea with her or walk into a room with having tea with someone else.
Okay, just a little humor to get you started, let you know you're not the only ones if you get some kind of odd feedback from your students. So on our panel here, we have Reed Skull from the Outreach Program and Susie Young from the College of Education and Donna Brown, who is currently with the ECTL and comes from the Agriculture Department of that College of Ag, thank you. Shoo. And Elizabeth Lynch, who is a professor in the anthropology program. So they have all dealt with their own evaluations as well as looking at others' evaluations. And I have a few questions here I'm going to ask them and let them share their tips, tricks, words of wisdom, horror stories, whatever they like. And then we'll open it for questions from you all as well. So the first question is, what red flags do you look for when you're reviewing evaluations? Want to go? Okay. Go ahead and then just pass it down.
Okay, what red flags? Am I talking into the, okay. There's no feedback. So I do two types of evaluations in all of my classes. I do a midterm evaluation, which asks specifically what students are learning so that I can see what's going on. And then we do the final arts and sciences evaluation at the end of the semester. So a red flag for me, or at least one of the red flags, is there a disconnect between what's going on at the mid-semester and what's going on at the end of the semester? So if I have really great feedback at the mid-semester, but at the end of the semester, I have like horrible feedback, it's never happened that way, but it could happen that way, then I want to look at where that disconnect is so that I can figure out, well, is it with the teaching style? Did I overcompensate in one direction at the middle of the semester and I shouldn't have done it? So it's really about learning how students responded to any changes that I made in the middle of the semester, and also to see if there's any real big disconnects.
Okay, I look for trends. I don't like to look at one-off comments. Some of these sort of random things I tend to ignore, but I do look for trends. Quite often things like a faculty member getting responses about being unresponsive to students, not following through, not responding to emails, not responding to questions in class, or not allowing students to ask questions. Slow to provide feedback, or not very good at providing students with any feedback, because to me that's a very important part of the learning cycle. Sometimes I've seen some that I found a little disturbing where the students themselves complain about a lack of course rigor. That one I find a little difficult to let go, because it's pretty unusual for the students to complain about lack of work. So if you've got a trend of a comment coming through about a lack of course rigor, that's one I do look at. Inconsistent behavior, so comments, and again it's a trend, not a random comment from one student, but comments about inconsistency in behavior, whether it's paying more attention to some students than others, or on one assignment maybe grading something in one way and on another grading it differently. Let's see, and one thing I look at, not just over one course, but over a series of courses or the same iteration of a course, is maybe what I would call intractability from a faculty member, where they've been given feedback about a particular thing, whether it be not responding to students, not getting their grades done, not posting grading. If that behavior continues, that's a real concern, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think for me, the red flags are the things that you see over and over again over time, because I think none of us are perfect in our teaching, and there's often over a period of time that you have a bad class, and it's not your fault, right? Well, it sometimes is your fault, but sometimes it's not your fault. And so it just sort of, but that pattern over time. And the other thing I was thinking about what you were talking about, just looking at, when I look at a set of evaluations, especially for somebody who's just starting out, and I see that kind of inconsistency between the ratings of the statements, the scale itself, and then the comments. And if I see something different in the comments, sometimes it makes me kind of wonder what's going on. Why are those comments so different from what I'm seeing in the scale? Because students tend to be pretty kind on those scales and rate you with high scores, and then they write things that are hurtful like that. I'll share one of mine with you later at some point if I'm brave enough to say it out loud. Still hurts. I think it was 20 years ago.
Oh. I might have broken.
Did. There you go. Now just talk.
Well, I should say in my role at the outreach school and the outreach school generally, we do not evaluate faculty. That's left up to departments. Our role is to support distance teaching and learning and make sure that there's as good of an environment for faculty and students as possible, and to cooperate with administrators like my colleagues here to make sure that they have the tools and the wherewithal to do their evaluation activities in the context of the distance environment. But that said, I talk with faculty administrators across the university, across all of the colleges, and I have to say I've heard comments like these before, and it's very upsetting and hurtful. And many times I wish, particularly, that somehow we could kind of overcome our culture, the culture that students live in, and teach the virtue of empathy and courtesy and being disagreeable in an agreeable way. There are a lot of nuances that I think are part and parcel in terms of what it means to be an educated person and a professional that I think we need to work on as an academy. And so not that would eliminate all of these comments, but I think as a faculty member, and I've received comments like this too, probably many more than my talented colleagues here, but I think it's important to remember that students are not professionals. They're learning, and they do make mistakes, and what they do know a lot about what teaching and learning is. They live it, after all, but they don't know everything, and they don't know what command you really have of pedagogy. They don't know what you really have in terms of a command of the subject matter. They don't know what command you have of classroom management, whether that be in an in-person or virtual environment. And so I think a lot of the leaders at this university in teaching and learning, like my colleagues here to my left, they're very sophisticated in how they look at faculty and their teaching, and they search for multiple ways of evaluation. And I really respect them for that. And they work with faculty. I know department chairs that work with faculty on portfolios of teaching so that they can draw connections between multiple classes and point out the trends. They also advocate for external reviews of teaching, particularly in the distance environment, so that faculty from other universities that are trusted and experienced in the area of distance learning and teaching in a particular discipline can come in and take a look at the courses as they stand and offer an alternative perspective. And I think just in the detached view that I have of evaluation, I think that's where it's really at. It's where we have some very caring administrators, associate deans and department chairs that take the time to get a multifaceted look at what faculty are really doing in that classroom when no one's looking with those students, and they find ways to do that. So hopefully I haven't talked too long, and I'm going to stop before I break this microphone.
Okay, thanks. And the next question is somewhat related, but you may have some more to add to it. So what are some things you overlook or maybe don't give as much merit to when you're reviewing evaluations? We can start where.
I'll start by saying all those types of comments you just watched on Janelle's video that are very personal attribute related, those I tend to overlook. So are they happy? Are they nice? Are they sad? Are they, that's not relevant at all. Whether they dress well, whether they dress poorly, the pocket square, really. Those types of things I don't take seriously and take into consideration. However, I will add to that, though, if there's personal comments that do start to hint at a red flag, like they're dismissive or they're dismissive of a particular group of students, then I might start and look. That becomes a little bit different than just happy, sad, or nice or not nice. So you've got to look a little deeper than just on the surface, I think, for some of those. And the one-off negatives, if there's one comment, one negative, I'm probably not going to pay it any heed either, because I look for the trends. If there's a whole group coming back and reiterating the same type of thing, yeah, then I might be looking at it. If there's one person that says, that person wasn't nice to me, or they asked for too much work and the rest of the class says thumbs up, the balance of work was great, then I'm not going to pay any attention to that either. So.
Okay, so just to clarify what I'm doing, I teach large freshman classes a lot of the time here at the university. So I teach some smaller classes, but mostly when I'm talking about this, I'm looking at large freshman classes. So what I tend to overlook, by the way, what Donna said about trends, get used to figuring out what the trends are, but I tend to, if I'm teaching a class for the first time, or if it's even a class that I've taught a lot of times, but I'm implementing a new discussion technique, or I'm introducing new materials that I haven't done before, I'll tend to not ignore anything. And it's hard, and I don't drink, but there are times when I want to sit down and I want to say, all right, I got to look at these evaluations and I have to read them all. And then I will look at the comments that are negative, and I will look at the comments that talk about how I dress, and I'll look at the comments that say they need somebody who has whatever, more experience doing whatever. And I'll look at those because that tends to tell me a lot about the student body in particular. We're at a large university, and if you're teaching freshmen, you want to know what kind of groups of students. If you're a faculty member who really wants to grow as a faculty member, you need to understand who your students are. And so I will tend to look at that and say, okay, a certain percentage, and yes, I do the percentages, a certain percentage of my students in this class noticed the way I dressed. A certain percentage of the students in this class didn't like my hairstyle. A certain percentage of the students in this class thought I was mean. A certain, whatever, thought I yelled at them, when in fact all I did was get excited, but they thought I yelled at them. And so I'm like, okay, well, people are going to take my excitedness to be yelling, so I need to take that into account. So I'll tend to not always dismiss them. But when I do look at trends, and if I am quickly going through to try to get analysis done for myself or for others, I will knock off the top 5%. She's the best person on this planet, and her class was the best class on this planet. I'll knock those off, and I'll knock the bottom 5% off too. So whichever falls into those two tails, I knock them off, and I won't pay attention to them because they just don't tend to notice that trend. So anyway, I talked too much.
Well, I guess for me, there's sort of two things here, is like how I look at my own teaching evaluations and how I look at teaching evaluations of faculty who come and talk to me about their evaluations. So for my own, of course, anything really negative that they say, I'm going to remember forever. And I can say I won't pay any attention to it, but I do. And so it sticks with me. It doesn't change my teaching very much, but hurts my feelings a lot if it's something like what you heard up here. And so I think that's really hard, and you have to figure out a way to, I don't know, I talk with a colleague of mine. We've talked about this for 20 years because our offices were right across the hall from each other, and we would read each other's teaching evaluations because neither one of us could sit down and read our own. It was just so hard. And so, we would read each other's, and then we would tell each other, okay, here's the, here's the great feedback people gave you. Here are the things that they liked. Here's some things that you could work on. And then you don't have to read them. So if you're one of those kind of people like I am that doesn't want to read, after reading the one negative comment that I had, I mean, I have had others, but I haven't had one quite like that. So I don't know. So then I think, when I'm looking at evaluations for someone else who wants to do better at their teaching and improve in certain areas, it's pretty easy to find those areas. It's like, well, you need to give papers back on time. You don't hang on to them for weeks and weeks, and that's an easy thing to fix. The harder things to fix are, how you teach and how you approach students. But I agree with what Donna was saying. The ones that I discount when I'm reading other people's evaluations are those surface level kinds of things. But when I read my own, I don't discount them at all, because everything is relevant when you do that. So,
one thing I noticed in the comments thus far is the issue of feedback and turnaround, and that's really important in a distance environment because the context is different and students are isolated, and what they don't know, the mind plays tricks on. And so the more, and this is something proactive that you can do to really boost your evaluations and really get at the substance of, focus more on the substance of teaching and learning rather than the mechanics of it, is to have a really good, clear, and strong policy about feedback and stick to it, because what students tell us, their number one concern is getting the feedback. And how can you do that? Well, you could say, I'm going to try to answer, you could put in your syllabus, I'm going to try to answer questions within 24 hours. And if I'm busy, I'll tell you, and it may be 48 or 72 hours, but I'll explain to you in advance. And I think that helps a lot of misunderstandings about feedback in a distance environment. And again, I do not evaluate faculty in the distance environment, but in observations, I know that sometimes faculty come and ask me to write a little note that describes what I've observed about their experience in teaching in a distance context. And sometimes I write these letters up, and they're, there's pluses and minuses, but I like to be advocates for faculty who do teach at a distance, because it takes a lot of extra effort and it takes a shift in consciousness that many of us are not trained and aren't conscious of to deal with. And so, I think it's important to recognize faculty who stick their necks out and they take risks with pedagogy, and they integrate technology. Sometimes they don't know what will happen. Most of us don't know what will happen when you integrate technology in a class. Things can go wrong. But I think, a lot of the great leaders, like the ones that are here, they recognize faculty who take chances with their teaching so that they can grow. And the faculty that they work with are just incredible. I derive a lot of inspiration from them as a distance ed administrator. I know that some faculty work on the weekends, for example, and develop little podcasts of them having coffee on Saturday morning and talking about what they do as professionals and what their lives are like. They're not unlike what many of our students go through, but they personalize the learning with technology, and sometimes that can blow up on you, but other times it can have great effect in terms of making learning personalized and building a sense of trust and community in a virtual space. And so I think, it's wonderful that we do have a lot of department chairs and deans that have a sense for that and are willing to recognize the risks that faculty do take when they try something a little different. Yeah, so.
All right, next question. Have you seen any common themes or threads that, as you're reading through either your own or others' evaluations?
Well, I think I kind of mentioned this, is that, the feedback is really crucial to students. I haven't taught in some time in a face-to-face environment, but I think it's the same thing. Feedback and is really critical. And when I was going, I went to school, college in the early 1980s, and it was a totally different calculus for faculty then than it is now. For example, if students failed, it was the students' fault. Today, it's on us. It's our responsibility. We have a much deeper understanding of the university experience and our responsibilities to see to it that everyone has a chance at learning and everyone has an opportunity to excel. And so I think it puts a lot of pressure on faculty. This is not an inconsequential shift, but it's an important one. And I think you can get at that by the kinds of efforts that not necessarily whether faculty could succeed in that new demand that's been placed on them over time, but what efforts they take to try to get at that sense of responsibility and the things that I mentioned, like the risk-taking and chance-taking, I think demonstrate a desire, to do differently and do better. So that's about what I.
Well, I don't know what a common theme would be, but I think Rita's right. It's a different world. I mean, I don't know how long CTLs have been around, but I was thinking about that and thinking we have so much help with our teaching and so many ways to help. And I think one of the, maybe this isn't the place to say this, but I think one of the most amazing things that you guys do in the CTL is to go into the classrooms and do the kinds of feedback and meet with the instructors and really help them. And gosh, that helping each other, not just, yeah, exactly. And just not going into your classroom like when I was in teaching high school, we just go in our rooms and close our doors, and however we teach is how we teach, and nobody really knows what we do. But it's a different world now. And so I'm really happy that we have a place to go that can help us with our teaching. So that's what I would say about that.
Along the lines, I think, of what both Susie and Rita have said, I haven't looked a lot at teaching evaluations in the last few years, but some of the exciting trends I think that I see are comments from students where they actually talk about a faculty member changing their learning or improving their learning. I think some of where I'm seeing it is sometimes from like the mid-semester feedbacks that we go in and do, but to see comments from students where they actually understand that a faculty member is doing something specifically to help them with their critical thinking skills or engaging them in a way that increases their learning but still making it fun, or wow, they really ask a lot of work, but I get why, because wow, I've really learned a lot. Those sorts of trends I think are really exciting to see. Some of the students themselves, I think, getting a better handle on what learning means, so that they're not just making the superficial comments of I like this person or I don't like this person, which for a while I think was pretty common. That was the sort of feedback we'd get. I don't like this person, or I don't like going to this class. It's like, well, why? Now I think we get from a lot of the students a bit more of the why and a bit better context of what they're talking about, what they're describing, which is really cool.
I would like to just kind of say, to echo that the thing I've noticed most of my students, the thing that makes them so nervous, and if you don't do it on a regular basis, you're going to get a lot of negative feedback, is getting their grades back to them, telling them what you expect of them, giving them a rubric. Not so much where, like when I first started teaching, rubrics weren't all that big, but now students want rubrics so much that it ends up on the evaluation if you don't give them rubrics, almost as if, well, she didn't give me a rubric, fire her. But that's not what they mean, but they just really are expecting it. So I see that kind of need for the feedback is really stronger in students. But I also have to echo what Donna said. I think that it might be because I do midterm evaluations, but I think the more you engage your students going along, the better feedback you're going to get on the end. So if they don't like you, they're going to tell you what about your course didn't sit right with them. I mean, I'll have students tell me I expected more of an international flair, but she talked about rites of passage in North America instead of dealing with Micronesia or something like that. And that's where their negative impression of the class came from. Well, that's something that's doable. That's something that's perfectly fine. I mean, if a student ends up with a negative perspective because they expected something different, then that helps people who are then looking at your evaluations to evaluate you as a teacher, kind of understand the students. So, but I kind of grow my students that way. But I do notice that the more I give them chances during class to give me feedback, the better and more cogent feedback I'm going to get on the final evaluations. And that's what TMP people see. That's what, if you're looking for a job and you need to include faculty evaluations, that's the way your search committee people are going to look at those evaluations as well. So I don't know if that helps.
That's great. And that's a great segue into the next question is what sort of advice or consideration do you give when you're talking with faculty and considering tenure and promotion and student evaluations, that relationship?
I'll start. I think it's important to include a teaching philosophy statement. Now, some colleges are more restrictive on what you can do than others, but I think that's absolutely critical because it gives context to how you see your role as a faculty member. It gives context to what you might be doing in your course. What if you've completely overhauled a course? What if you've tried something really new and really innovative? That's not necessarily going to show up in the student evaluations because they're examining you in that one instance in time. But if you give that context yourself, and you have Susie talked about you occasionally have a bad year or a bad class. What if you've just completely overhauled the course? Would you expect those first evaluations to be perfect? Probably not. That's what you're trying to do, is try something new, try something innovative. That comes with a risk. Some things might go well, some things might not. Give it that context. But along with that, if you're doing those types of things, I think it's really important as you're making those sorts of changes in a course to be communicating with your supervisor, your department chair, talking about what's going on in your course. Don't wait till the end of the semester when you get the evals and go, woof. Talk about what's happening. Talk about what you're seeing going on in your class. Talk about what's going well, what's exciting you, what's disappointing you, especially about some of the new things you're trying. Talk with peers. Talk about ways to say, oh, this isn't going quite how I thought. How can I turn this around before the end of the semester? Don't leave it till you get to the end and get those evaluations that maybe have a few red flags in them before you talk to someone, because I think that's worse. I think it's better to keep framing it as you go. So I think they're really important. I think it's already been mentioned. Include other sorts of evaluation just beyond student evaluations when you're talking about your TMP. Or do your own. Like Elizabeth said, do your own mid-semester feedbacks, or have ECTL come in and do mid-semester feedbacks. Have peers come in and observe your course. It doesn't have to be from your discipline. I think some of the best feedback you can sometimes get is from someone outside your discipline. I know for me, if I go and observe someone's class in a discipline completely different than my own, and I can sit there and engage and understand what's happening, it's like, wow, that's a way positive flag for me. They're doing something right because I could connect and I could follow. So sometimes bringing that outside person in is good. And I think document. If you're doing professional development like you're doing here, document that you're doing it as part of your TMP. Let people see that you really are working on improving your teaching and that you are going out and learning innovative new strategies that you might be incorporating into your courses. I think that's huge. Always matters to me as I look at a packet related to our teaching portfolio, that all those things are there.
Well, I'm just thinking of one of the things that we have our faculty do in the College of Ed that is really helpful is is creating a document that tracks their overall evaluations over time. And so we have them do like a little bar graph or a line graph showing, like, we take our kind of overall, you know, how effective is this teacher, how effective is this course in your learning, and we graph those two things so that we can see the trends, you know, where they're improving over time, especially as you first get started. Sometimes you struggle a little bit with how to organize things, and everything affects everything else. And so we start to see those trends, and somebody might say, wow, your teaching evaluations for last fall were horrible. And then they look at that document that shows how it looks over time, and yeah, it was just that one semester and what was going on that one semester, because we don't want to think that someone isn't a good teacher because we saw one downside. So I think it's really important to put it, I mean, I think Donna said it in response to the very first question, is like, you're looking at what's going on over time, not just one evaluation or one semester. So
okay. I do like this idea of the teaching philosophy statement, because it kind of forces you to be reflective. And I haven't done one in a while, and I need to do one, because I think we make a lot of unconscious decisions about how we teach, and a lot of times we rely on how it's always been done rather than what could be done. And possibly by doing one of these philosophy statements, I think it could lead to helping you put things into perspective and give you a sense of where you want to go and who you want to be as a faculty member and as a teacher and professor. So.
That's a critical point there, is you have to know who you are and who you want to be as a faculty person. And if you want to get out of the business after you teach your course, and this is the only course you ever want to teach, well, then obviously you don't need to spend a lot of time. But if you're really going to make education in whatever field your lifelong mission, then you need to have a philosophy statement. You need to understand, and not a canned one or one that you're just trying to get a job, so you're using somebody else's or whatever, but you really need to sit down and think of, what do I believe? And then you can start. What Susie said, I wish I'd done the first semester I started teaching, which was the worst evaluations I ever had, my very first time in a classroom. I tanked it. The comments were horrible. I cried. It was horrible, but I keep those evaluations, even though that was back in 2009. I keep those evaluations because I want to know, how have I improved through time? So you have to track the ANS. You have to do a long-term tracking of your ANS evaluations, or I'm saying ANS, whatever college you're in, evaluations. You want to look at the numbers. You want to see how you stack up with the people around you. You want to see how you stack up with yourself last semester, and you want to do it course by course. But you also want to be able to see, like, spring last semester, my evaluations went down, not horribly, but they went down because I introduced a new pedagogic technique, and I had to educate students. They've never seen it before. And so that kind of created a lot of anxiety in the student body, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to look at all the negative comments, because I wanted to see, you know, how much anxiety did introducing this new method actually have on my students. But more importantly, when my chair or somebody asks me about these evaluations, I need to be able to say, okay, this is why it looks different than last semester, and this is what it might look like in the future, and here's what I'm going to do about it. So you really do need to know who you are, who you believe you are, who students see you, what students see you as. Also, that's another thing of looking at your evaluations for yourself critically, is say, well, here's who I think I am, but here's what students see, and kind of come to terms with that on some level, because it's important if you're going to stick in the biz and improve, I think.
So just thinking about how easy it is to do that, I think most of us now are using Evaluation Kit for our course evaluations, and you can actually have Evaluation Kit generate a report with all the means for whatever questions you choose over all your courses. And teaching evaluations in higher ed has been my research area for quite some time. And one of the things that I've learned is that if I teach depending on what level I teach or what kind of class I teach, I get different types of evaluations. And so I sort of track that. So if I teach an undergraduate class, my teaching evaluations tend to be lower than if I teach a graduate class. And that trend shows in the research. And also, you know, difficult classes, you would think you would get, you know, you would get more critical evaluations for difficult classes than easy classes. Actually, it's the other way around, because people just don't like busy work. Students don't appreciate it. And the other thing I want to say about online evaluations before I forget, one of the things we noticed when we first went to online evaluations, which was over 10 years ago when we first started doing it in the college, we decided people said, well, you know, if we're doing online evaluations, they're going to be different. You know, students are going to rate teachers differently, instruction differently. And so we decided we would do a comparison. So we had a semester where we had like 25 of our faculty volunteered to have their courses evaluated online, and they were no different. And in fact, our response rates were higher with online because students could actually fill them out whenever they wanted to. But the thing that was really different is that the students commented more. And so in the old ones, they would just, well, I'm ready to leave class. I'd like to go now, so I'm not going to write anything, or I'm just going to say, she's great. And which is what they would say. She's nice. She's a great statistics teacher. But now they write a lot, and so you get lots of great feedback. And so I think if you as instructors try to help them understand how important it is that they give you some really helpful constructive feedback. I mean, it's their turn to do that, and they need to do it, and they need to also understand how important it is to you to hear it. So I think that's what I would say about that.
What I've got to say kind of follows along a little bit from both what Elizabeth and Susie said. It's not just even course level. I think it's course type. You might find as you start and look at your own evaluations and really reflect on your own philosophy that you're going to find your own comfort zone. You know, for me, a large lecture is an incredibly uncomfortable place. Just not my strength. I'm well aware that that isn't my strength in teaching. Where I'm happiest is in a studio or a lab type course where I have the opportunity to engage at a much more one-on-one level. So I think learning that about yourself and making that a clear part of your own philosophy is also really, really important. And understanding if you're going to have to do the other, that you don't just go to just general workshops about improving your teaching, but really focus on the areas that you need to build on. And the ones that maybe aren't your strength. Yes, yeah, you know, lectures aren't my favorite thing. Can I do it? Yeah, but am I comfortable in that setting? Not so much. And I think that's an important part for you to own as you write your teaching philosophy.
Yeah, I could add something. I think I do want to mention Dr. Young's contribution to evaluations and evaluation kit, because several years ago you took the lead in implementing a system that really permits you know, faculty and administrators to understand how the teaching of one relates to the teaching of others, and how what you do as an individual professor can be placed in a really powerful and nuanced context. And sometimes it does require leadership to figure out little things like, what are electronic ways that evaluations can be administered? And so I think, you know, as someone who works with a lot of colleges, I just have to recognize those contributions because I think they're really important. And give it back to you.
Okay, next question. We just have a few more here. What advice do you give to faculty for resources? So if maybe they do need some improvement, there's a particular trend that you keep seeing over and over, and they might need some advice on resources. I can name one, but but what advice do you give them?
You know, one thing that we do with the distance classes, and I think this is very analogous to what ECTL does, and that is we refer faculty to instructional design support. And this is a fairly recent phenomenon. Really in the past 15, maybe 20 years has the role of instructional design become apparent. And because technology is changing and because our students are changing so rapidly, really it's beyond one faculty member to have a tight grasp on all the angles of what makes for good teaching and learning. And so instructional designers, of which we have about 5, 6, 7, I think, on the campus, they're really critical in providing some kind of reflector for faculty and some kind of a additional resource. And if instructional designers are really clever about it, they make those learning opportunities so that they're really owned and controlled by the faculty, and the faculty see their own, their own power to improve their pedagogy. So we're quite fortunate, really, on this campus to have some excellent examples of instructional designers that understand their ability to help. But I try to refer a lot of people who have questions about teaching and learning to our instructional designers.
Well, of course, the obvious place we refer people, anybody really, because we can all get better at our teaching, is to come here. But you guys can't do everything for everybody. And one of the things we try to do in our college is to observe each other, because you can learn a lot about teaching from going into somebody else's classroom and doing an observation for them. You know, you can, and then in turn, then they come into your class and give you some feedback. And so, but I think it's really important too to say to them, don't just tell me the things that I do really well, tell me what I can improve on. And then it's not just about that one moment in time. And so, you know, taking a look at your syllabus and what's your plan, what are you planning to do that day, and all of that, the whole context of the class for that class period that they're coming into. But I think that's really important. So, and not just, I mean, sometimes I will say, well, you know, I know a particular person does a really nice job in lecturing, and so let's go watch that person, go listen to them. And sometimes you just go sit in and you're not really doing an evaluation, you're just watching. And so I think that's really an important resource, because we're all doing a lot of teaching, and then it gets even more difficult when you're teaching online. And so how do you invite people in? And even in the very beginning of teaching online, we were trying to figure that out, and we would just have to allow people into the course so they could see what we're doing. And I don't know that we've gotten much beyond that.
No.
So I don't know how you get somebody to go into your class and just observe a class, because there is no class. It just goes on and on. So I don't know how to focus all that. Did you want this back?
Well, I did want to mention this, is that it is a conundrum, because there are some legal ins and outs when you let someone, perhaps a faculty member from another university, into your virtual space and see that what's going on in an online class. It's very healthy and it's necessary, but the law has not progressed in the pace of pedagogy. And so it's an open question legally whether you can do that. And many learning management systems don't easily permit, faculty from outside, even if the faculty member who actually owns the rights to the access to the class wants it. So there are faculty around the university that are working on this issue, and I think in the fairly near future, we're going to see more examples of external evaluation from faculty who teach at a distance in the same disciplines. And I think it's going to be really healthy.
I agree with everything these guys have said so far. I think what Susie said about, observing other people teach is really, really important. Having other people observe you is important. I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, don't necessarily think you have to stick to just your own discipline, though, to do that, to learn about teaching. I will tell you from my years of doing teaching observations, I think I've learned more about teaching from people in other disciplines than I have from within my own. I think within a discipline, we sometimes get stuck in what's the right way to teach in our own discipline. And I think going and observing outside can be really valuable to see what other people do in different disciplines that you could apply that you just might not have thought of. But I think another thing that might be really important is finding a safe space to talk about teaching. I know for a lot of junior faculty, sitting and talking about their failures perhaps, or the things they're struggling with peers within their discipline can be a little threatening because they're the same people that are going to judge them for TMP. So finding a group of like peers, so, you know, for example, Janelle's developed some like peer mentoring groups out of the new faculty orientation series, where these are faculty from all sorts of different disciplines, but at the same point in their academic career. And that gives you a safe space to go and talk, mentor one another, talk about your teaching issues, where you don't feel like you're actually necessarily being judged for saying, I'm having a problem or something's not going well. So I think finding something like that is absolutely critical. Somewhere where you can feel safe to talk about your, not just your successes, but definitely the things you think of failures.
So I don't have much to add to what they said, except Susie said, I disagree with you all. No, I don't disagree with you. I actually agree with everything. The one thing that I do that's slightly, I mean, I do all of these things, all of the above, but I also have a faculty mentor who's a senior faculty member in my department, and I work with her one-on-one for everything, for if I'm trying something new out in class or whatever. And then I have her come and evaluate my class, and I have her sit in things like if I'm going to do something different. I'll have Janelle come and sit in if I'm doing something new and different, because I want outside evaluations. But I really think it's important to have a faculty mentor in your department if you don't have one, because as long as they're as committed to teaching as you are, they could maybe they're not committed to teaching, in which case you could be in trouble. But
okay, and just to recap on some of what folks have said, as you know, the ECTL offers a lot of support. We can do midterm evaluations. We do workshops on teaching philosophies. We have all kinds of handouts and things for that. Yep, the 20-minute mentor that comes out every Monday that you can read and do little video interaction type things with those. We can look at your evaluations and do consulting with you on that and just say, here's trends that we see. We also are starting a certification program if you're interested, where you can do a whole certification in teaching and learning that covers teaching philosophies and way much more. So that's just a quick little plug. But I wanted to give you all a chance to ask any questions if you have any before we go. So we've done a lot of talking up here, and we have a question back there. Okay.
Mary says, I teach online classes, and in the last few years I have followed discussions about implicit bias with regard to gender and race. I also read The Confidence Gap in the Atlantic that raises the data on the internal and external gender differences with regard to confidence and competence. I have also read studies on the different reactions of students to the same professor depending on the name of the professor in an online class, where women names received inferior ratings consistently. To what extent would you say the university administrators and HODs know and work with the knowledge that women will generally suffer from less confidence, men will generally enjoy a greater sense of confidence, and that students rate women's performance lower even if the same professor is using a male and or female name? I'm pragmatic, this is the case. But to what extent is the university assessment culture up to speed on implicit bias and gender disparity with regard to teaching evaluations?
Okay, I'm going to turn that over to you all, but I do know there have been studies done where online a professor switches and says their name is Jane instead of John or whatever, but it's actually the male, and they get lower scores if they're listed as a female versus a male. It's pretty interesting. But what do you all know about any of this?
Just from the anthropology perspective, I know that it's a real big conversation point in our department. So I'm not sure how it makes it up to the TMP level, but in terms of like our chair of our department and other faculty members, everybody pretty much knows there's gender bias in the evaluations, both in class and online. So I think it's pretty well known.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's known. Coming from a College of Agriculture, where we have some disciplines that are still very heavily male dominated in terms of their faculty. We've seen it with, team teaching, where you've got a male faculty member and a female faculty member in the same course together, and the male, without doubt, will get better teaching evaluations than the female part of the team. So we're aware of it. I don't know what is done at a institutional level in terms of any sort of dealing with it. I think it's acknowledged, but I don't know that it's ever really considered separately in TNP. You any ideas?
Yeah, I don't really think that it is. So I suppose if you're teaching online, you should just have a male name, right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. I think having conversations about it, like this conversation, is really important. I think that everyone is aware, and I think they do acknowledge it. We certainly talk about it in our college, so I'm glad the question came up. I don't know how we adjust for it, because we can't just say, well, if you're a female, then we'll just, you get extra points. We'll bump it up a little bit. I mean, we're not going to do that, but I think having our awareness and our understanding raised is good, and we do it by talking.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to some of what we've talked about, is looking at trends over time rather than that one instant in time, I think, and just the raw numerics, but looking at how the trend is going in the teaching is what I tend to look more at than I do comparing the female faculty member to the male. I look at how is that person doing, what's their teaching trajectory like. I think that helps some with some of those issues. It doesn't necessarily fully resolve it at an institutional level, but at least it helps looking at each individual as an individual and looking at their teaching trajectory is how I tend to approach it.
Just add one more thing. I guess I just never, as a statistician, I read a lot of studies where we're comparing this group to that group. We're comparing males to females on teaching evaluations. And I think that just serves to highlight those differences and to make things more divisive. And what are we going to do about that difference, instead of just looking at how we're doing and how we're teaching and how our department is doing overall, and not just how the males are doing compared to the females. I've never seen a study like that done at UW, and I hope I don't. Did you have anything?
Well, I would say that, I have read some of the research in the area, but I think it's important to keep it in context so that it doesn't become explosive and divisive, because some of the comments in those articles that maybe aren't related to research but are more related to the kind of conclusions and discussions part can be taken and really become explosive issues that block us from learning and understanding. But it is important to note that there is that body of literature out there, and the last article I read on this was in Language and Education. It was a couple years ago, and it talked about extensive study of Rate My Professors, which is a popular social site. And the findings were not as important as what it reminded me of, and that is that a lot of students treat, I see that a lot of students treat some of the comments, their critiques, almost as though they were commenting about a restaurant on Yelp. And there's a lot of flaming and a lot of hyperbole that goes on in these comments, and I think it's even more so when race and gender issues come into play. And so there's a lot of sensitivity that I think, and a lot of measured reaction that has to be applied in those contexts. Yeah.
All right, other questions from you all? Yeah.
So I know we're able to add custom questions to the evals. Do you have advice on what kinds of questions we should ask?
Good question, yeah.
Actually, I think it sort of relates to what we were talking about earlier. If you're doing something new and different, maybe you just changed your textbook, maybe you're changing how, maybe maybe you just added a rubric and you want to get some feedback on that. So what you want to know about a specific change you've just made or an approach that you've just made. And with the custom questions, you can say, that's just for me. So I'm not sharing those with my department head. They're not going to T&P, they're private. And you can't change your mind later unless you want to print them off and share them, but otherwise people don't really have access to them. So I think find out about the things you want to know, especially what you've recently added or changed. So, anything else? Other questions? Does that help?
Yeah.
So since most of us graduate assistants, when we're teaching a class for the first time, and then do you have to mention that you're a graduate assistant actually? And then if you see that some undergraduate students maybe not see you as a professor level, and they sometimes try to complain and then go beyond not letting you that there was some misunderstanding or didn't understand some topic and go upper, how can you handle in these situations?
Maybe I'm the one who's had a graduate assistant most recently. So what I understand your question to be is if a student has a problem with the graduate assistant and then goes around the graduate assistant to your professor or to higher than your professor? Higher? Okay, so this is for me personally, but I have a management background. So my graduate assistants usually go to all of my classes, and so I kind of monitor everything. But if a student has a problem with one of my graduate assistants, they will usually come and talk to me about it. And once they come and talk to me, I will take an active role in trying to decide what's going on with that. That being the case, so I will know intimately what's going on. So if a student or say students decide to go around both of us and go to my chair, the very first thing the chair of my department is going to do is call me in. You won't see them. I'll see them, and then I'll be able to talk about the problem. If by some weird situation I got left out of the loop, the same thing would happen. The chair of my department would come to me. The way I would resolve that issue is I would become intensively involved with dealing with the student or the students at that point, depending on what the problem is. If it's a simple thing of they're never grade, they don't grade anything that I submit them, then it's something that's an easy fix. If it's something the graduate assistant is offensive in some way or another, that is a little bit more counseling oriented. I don't know if that answered your question. Does that help? I do, just to follow up on that, because evaluations and keeping track of your peer evaluations and having that all in your record, like having people come to your class and then write a letter for you, people are asking for peer reviews, like if you're looking outside the university. So if you're a graduate student and you're getting evaluated for class, I would have your supervising professor write you a peer review evaluation for your class, looking at your evaluations and then looking at the way you're teaching the class or the lab or whatever you're doing, and then put that in your portfolio, because you can keep track of your own performance at the same time, the same level.
Other questions? Yeah.
So I'm in a department that doesn't assign mentors, and I was advised on my packet to get a mentor for teaching. So I talked to my department head, and he just said, pick somebody who you think is a good teacher. So I picked somebody who got a PI award, but he's not senior faculty. And I'm just wondering if it's looked upon poorly that I chose somebody like that, or
how do you select somebody, and what kind of, I mean, you kind of spoke to how your mentor works with you, but can you give me more specifics, I guess?
I think choosing a PI mentor, choosing somebody who has a PI award, I think is an excellent choice. The way I chose my faculty mentor, she hasn't had a PI award, but she was awarded a distinction for undergraduate teaching at arts at the graduation ceremony. It was like the teacher who changed my life kind of award. And there were like 3 or 4 of them. So I chose her for that, but I also chose her because she had 2 experiences of horrible classes, people who just rebelled against her. It was the horror situation. And yet she was able to work with that within her career and also within her whole line. So she had that horror situation, but she also has had like these honors, teaching honors and accolades. So that's the reason why I wanted her in my class, so she could kind of walk me through the gamut of how you would do it. But I think choosing a PI recipient is an awesome choice.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, I don't think you need to have somebody who's an associate professor or a full professor. I think you need to have somebody who has the experience that you need to draw from and be able to actually mentor you. So I think that's much more important. So nice job picking a PI award winner. I think that's really good. Yeah, the time and willingness to do it. Maybe assistant professors are better because they might have more time, or they might have less time. I don't know.
Or they may have come through themselves through an education system that is actually more innovative than some of us seniors who our teaching experience or our teaching pedagogy practice when we were grad students was, here's your packet, your course packet, have at it. That was my training. So I think some of us didn't have CTLs, we didn't have those sorts of opportunities. So looking at someone that's had more opportunity perhaps to get training in pedagogy to be your mentor is a good thing, because they may have some more innovative strategies up their sleeve to share with you.
Other questions? All right, I'm going to quick leave you with a story and then thank the panel. So my degree is educational psychology, so I have lots of experience in teaching and have often got pretty good evaluations, and in fact teach others how to teach well. But that does not mean that I haven't had bad evaluations, and I always think this is such a learning experience that even someone who's supposed to be an expert in teaching can still get bad evaluations, so don't be disheartened. Last summer I taught a class it was through the University of Louisville, but it was with Army ROTC instructors. And it was a very different kind of class. It was teaching them teaching and learning, which is what I do, which I'm supposed to be an expert in. And different kind of class, different kind of student. And my first evaluations for the first class were not so great. And it was really eye-opening to me, like, wow, this can happen to those who are supposed to be experts in this field. So please don't feel disheartened. But it was a great learning experience for me too, to go, okay, what do I need to do differently? How do I take this to heart and really make some changes? So hang in there. And of course, use your peers, use your mentors, use the ECTL, anyone for resources and helping get through all that. Thank you very much to our panel of experts and all your advice and words of wisdom. All right, and thank you all for coming. Thanks.